Hi, this is Brett Ingram, award-winning digital marketer and entrepreneur, and today I want to share with you 8 questions that help entrepreneurs make strategic decisions. As entrepreneurs, we are the captains of our ship. We have total control over what decisions to make and what decisions we do make. So not only the decisions that we need to make, but also whether we go yes or no with all the decisions that we are making. At times, we have to actually consider business shaping, destiny making or breaking massive decisions. Might sound a little bit dramatic, but the reality of it is it's absolutely true, because where else does the vision come from? Where else do the decisions that make the market that we are in, make the brand that we're building, be what it is or lack of what it is? And so the fact of the matter is, those massive decisions can literally make the difference between success and failure, or between mediocrity and historical achievement. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, as an entrepreneur, that is a lot of pressure. And it can be really exciting, but it can also be really terrifying too. So the question becomes, how do we make these decisions? You know, as we've said before on other episodes, emotional decision making usually is not a great idea. So while we might be excited or we might be exhilarated and we want to go for broke in our heart or in our gut, the smart thing to do is to have a process that helps us make the best possible decisions. So that way, our odds of success go up. And they go up not just with any one decision, but with all the decisions that we're ultimately going to make. So over the course of time, created 9 different questions that entrepreneurs can help us to make strategic decisions. And when we go through these questions and we ask them, it gives us a lot of clarity. It gives us the ability to sort of step back, see the full picture, and make a decision that makes the most logical sense from a business perspective, from a future perspective, and to take every other element of it into account. So we don't end up in a situation where we make a decision with our gut thinking that it was a great idea, only to sort of slapping ourselves in the head later saying, why didn't I see this? I knew that wasn't going to make sense, or I knew that it wasn't going to work. So this is basically the better way to do it. The first question is, how do I define, or what is the actual decision I need to make? Now, it might sound a little silly or a little obvious, but the reality of it is, a lot of times when we are wrestling or grappling with big ideas, right, we don't always have them necessarily totally crystallized. We've got a general idea, but when we actually cull it down and we think about it in terms of, okay, I need to make this into a yes or a no, or a go or a no-go type decision, how do I do that? Like, what is the actual decision that I'm sitting here to make? And once we're able to define it in that way, it gives us a lot more clarity in terms of what it is that we want to do, and what it is that we're actually going to be determining. And so that's the first step in trying to really understand and try to crystallize what it is that we're looking at in terms of the decision. It also puts parameters around it, and it makes it seem a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, and a little bit more easy to sort of assess. The next question is there a demand for it? Does it make sense in the industry or market? Now, obviously, this is conditional on the fact that the decision that we're making is relative to a market offering, a product, a service, a branding situation, those kinds of things. There will be other decisions where that particular question may not fit in, but when we're talking about things like that, it's super important, because we need to understand that while we might feel really good about this, at the end of the day, if the industry or the market or something like that doesn't fit, it doesn't make sense, there's not going to be a demand for it, then we don't ultimately want to do that. An example of something that I was working on in my own business, I had worked on a video software product that I was creating for over the course of 4 years, and invested a lot in it, and had launched it successfully in smaller, like sort of incremental segments under different brands. And the idea was I was going to make it into a huge market player to compete with some of the big video software out there. Well, as I got to sort of the point where I needed to really make a decision about whether I was going all in or whether I wanted to go another path, I started to assess, and what I realized at the time is Canva had just jumped into the video market. There were a few other big players that had jumped into the video market. Now, I don't necessarily know that their product is going to be great, but what I do know is they have a massive budget, they have a massive team, and ultimately, if they're at the level where they're running ads on TV for the product that they're creating, they're serious. And so with that as the backdrop and understanding that I would be competing against that because that's essentially the kind of product that I was making, you know, for me, it was to figure out whether the industry or market had a demand for it. Well, it did, right? So I knew the demand was there, but was I going to be able to execute that? Was I going to be able to pull that off? So understanding what's going on in the industry and market and how that fits into what we're trying to do and whether or not it makes sense is something that's really important. Now, conversely, when I was trying to decide whether or not to do a podcast, I knew that there was going to be, it was going to take a lot of work and all these other things. It's a big undertaking. It's not something that you just decide one day you're going to do and throw it together. And so the question became there, same thing. Well, when I did the research and analysis on that, not only did I find that, the market was in a place where it would support it, but I felt like the particular thing that I was going to offer, I didn't really see. There are a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts, but I didn't see any that were set up in the format that I was doing, and certainly not with my frame of reference and expertise and experience. There are a lot of people that have done things better than me in various markets, and a lot of people who haven't done as much. And so my particular voice, I felt, was valuable, and there was a need for it. And so those were sort of like big decisions that could be made by answering that question and understanding how it fits in to whether or not there's an overall demand for it. Along the lines of that, we need to ask, does it fit within our core vision and business? So for me, in both cases, both did. I do software and I do things for businesses and entrepreneurs and things like that. So certainly a video software that will allow people to make really cool videos in today's digital age makes a lot of sense, right? So it did fit within the core business. There were other reasons it didn't make sense to continue on with it. But when we look at the podcast, for me, it 100% did. Because one of the things that I really wanted to do is sort of step out into the light and instead of behind my computer and doing all these things sort of behind the scenes and just putting brands out there, I wanted to share my expertise. I wanted to share my experience, my perspective, and I wanted to hopefully inspire and motivate and reassure entrepreneurs out there that are trying to make their dreams come true, that maybe are just looking for that extra boost or whatever else. And so that's 100% in my core vision of business. I mean, the reason I set out to create the software in the first place is that it was software designed to automate and simplify what people already need to do as entrepreneurs. And so what better way to do that than to be able to provide yet another sort of avenue for those same kinds of things. The next question that we want to ask is, if it fits within our core vision and business, then obviously that makes it a lot more sense to pursue it. If it doesn't, then in and of itself, unless we're going to go through a full rebrand, unless we're going to change the whole direction of our business, despite the fact that there might be some money to be made or whatever else, it doesn't make sense. If I'm in a particular business and now AI I see as the big hot thing, well, to run out and start making AI stuff just automatically because it seems hot is not a good decision. Because there are going to be people where that aligns with what they're doing for their business. So if it does, it makes sense. If it doesn't, then it doesn't, right? And so we don't want to sort of try to jam a square peg into a round hole, even if it seems like it could be really lucrative, if it doesn't fit within what we're currently trying to do. The next question that we need to consider is, do we have the capacity to take it on? Or what would we need to be able to take it on? So even if, again, we have a great idea, we know, hey, this fits within the industry, there's a huge need for this, it fits within our core business, we love this, do we have the capacity, right? And if we don't have it currently in the business, what would we need to have that? You know, when I wanted to start my podcast, I recognized that it was going to take a couple hours a day out of my schedule. And so if I was going to be able to do that, I needed to have people around me that I knew could do the other things. I was going to need help with the podcast itself in terms of production, marketing, those kinds of things. But I also was going to need help with the whole software side of the business, because the fact is I'm being pulled away from that for a few hours a day to create this. And so I didn't at the time have the capacity, but I knew exactly what I needed was to just get an additional person or two to help in the areas that I needed. And so I could spec that out and figure out exactly what it would take. This is the capacity I was going to need. This is what it was going to cost me. And I could figure all of those things out. And so we want to determine whether or not we have the capacity, because again, just because something is a great idea, if it's going to overwhelm us, if it's going to put us underwater, then it's not a great idea. And by the way, capacity can be manpower or, people power, so to speak, but it can also be financial capacity. We need to look at, what's the cost from a budgeting standpoint. Some things, like if I was going to take on the video product, this is where the issue fell for me, because I would have needed a team of probably 12 to 15 more people, and I would have needed several millions of dollars in order to, in capital funding, in order to be able to create what I wanted to do to compete with the people that I wanted to compete with. And so at the time, it just didn't make sense for me within the current structure of what I was doing. The podcast I was able to do and fit that in and make it in a way that it made a lot more sense. So we need to consider the capacity from a manpower or people power perspective, labor perspective, but also from and our own personal time, but also from a financial perspective. Can we take this on? Is it going to sink the ship, or can we absorb what this is going to require in the short term until we can turn it into something that's profitable? And so if we don't have the capacity right now, what will we need and what will it take to get there? The next question that we want to consider is, how do I plan to achieve it? So if we've got an idea and we feel like, hey, this is going to fit in the market, there's a demand for it, it fits in our core business, yeah, we've got the capacity, right? We've got the finances, we've got the people or the members of the team that are going to be able to help create this. What is the actual plan? It doesn't need to be step by step, like every little thing. I mean, we can create that at a later date. But what's the general idea? What is the big picture idea for how we're going to achieve that? If we want to create something that's brand new in the market, well, just the general idea of doing that isn't going to be enough. We need to have sort of sketched out at least a skeleton of what it's going to look like, or the scaffolding of what it's going to look like, in order to be able to create sort of this new thing that we're trying to do. So do I have a plan? And if I really sat down, would I be able to create a plan that's step by step to actually achieve this? Or am I going to just start and then hope that everything else becomes clear along the way? So it's super important to be able to understand that there needs to be something in place that we're going to be able to follow that's going to get us to where we want to be. Once we've got all of those things out of the way and we know basically what we're looking at, the next thing that we want to start to consider is, what is going to happen once we've undertaken this? So if we've decided that, pretty much everything is viable from the perspective of, if we wanted to do this, we could do it. The next thing that we really want to consider is, what is the best case scenario outcome? If we have decided that there's a possibility of actually doing this, let's pretend for a minute that we achieve it. Let's pretend for a minute that we actually accomplish what we set out to do. What is the best case scenario? What is it going to look like? What does it look like financially? What does it look like from a branding or sort of image perspective? What does it look like from a footprint perspective in the market for our own business? What does it look like in terms of, the internals and the externals? And obviously from a financial perspective, what does it look like in terms of what we could make from this? What would be the end result and end goal from the best case outcome? And once we've considered that, now we know what the ceiling is, right? We need to know what is going to be possible and what we think that we might be able to get out of this if we were to do it, and what the result could be. Then we need to flip the script, and we need to look at what is the worst case outcome. So if all of the things that we had projected, if all of our ideas, if all the things that we set out to do don't work out, and it can be for any reason. It doesn't mean that, we failed or we're not able to execute. Maybe there's a shift in the market. Maybe another player came in and beat us to it. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter why, right? That's not what we're considering. What we want to know is, what is the worst case outcome? Because once we know the worst case outcome and we know the best case outcome, now we've got a sense of what the ceiling is and what the floor is. If we don't consider the worst case outcome and then that happens to us, we get caught with our pants down, that can be a really difficult situation. It can be something that actually kills the business. So it needs to be something we've thought through. Despite the fact that we want to be optimistic and believe the best is going to happen, we always have to consider what is the worst case outcome, right? Because then we know, okay, the bottom falls out of this guy for us. This is where we're going to be, right? And so we at least have an understanding, and we've come to terms with that up front. Then, once we have an idea of the ceiling and the floor, we want to figure out what is my best prediction of the odds of success. Okay, so if the ceiling is way up here and the floor is here and the odds of success are 90%, well, it becomes pretty clear it's a pretty easy decision to make, right? Because we know. If on the other hand, the ceiling is here and the floor is way down there and it's an existential threat and the odds of success are 10%, that might be a huge risk to undertake, because if it doesn't work out and there's a high probability that it won't, then we're going to fail. And so we want to sort of get an idea. And of course, it's a prediction. There's no way we can know. If we knew this in advance, then obviously there would be a no-brainer decision. But we want to, with our best idea and our best guess and our most brutally honest truth with ourselves, really try to figure out what is my best prediction of the odds of success. That was the thing for me with the video software that caused me to say no. I believe I could build it. And I believe that I could make a product that's better than anything else that's out there. However, in light of the fact that I need a massive budget, a huge team, all these other things, and I've got massive competitors, I just didn't think that the odds that I would be able to get there first were high enough to make sense for the risk, right? So we're sort of weighing risk and reward. And so when we have a prediction of the odds of success, then we have an idea of, okay, floor, ceiling, and prediction. Now it's starting to come into clear focus what is really at stake and what the probability is here that we're going to be able to make it work. And then the last thing that we want to ask, and this is really important, is if the worst thing were to happen, can I live with that, right? This is the old existential question of, do we survive it if this happens? Can we live with that? And actually, this is a question I believe it's Warren Buffett actually uses. Every time that he's going to invest, people asked him, how are you so successful? How come you keep picking all these winners and you're investing in all these companies? I mean, don't you ever get nervous? He said, of course I do. But the fact of the matter is, what I do is I assess to the best of my ability the investment I'm going to make. And I assess the best and worst case scenario. And then I ask myself the question, if the worst thing were to happen, can I live with that? If the answer is yes, then I go for it and I never look back. I never consider the worst anymore. I just work my tail off to make sure the best thing happens. If the answer is no, I don't invest. It's that simple. And it's a great actual adage to live by as entrepreneurs and business owners too. Because if we go through all this, no matter how excited we are about the idea, no matter how passionate we are and how much we want it to work, if we believe that if the worst were to happen, we can't live with it, then we shouldn't pursue it because the risk is too great and the consequences are too dire. And so that's the sort of the be all end all question at the end of it. By asking these questions, we get a clear sense of the big picture, and hopefully we can make the decision easier and with a higher probability of success. And we can do this same process over and over again, anytime and every time that we have a big decision to make. So the takeaway here is making big, tough decisions is part of the job description as an entrepreneur and a business owner. It just is. And while we might like to rely on our gut or our instincts to decide what to do, that's a risky proposition if we're putting the future of our business on the line. By asking ourselves these few simple questions, we can clarify exactly what the costs and benefits are, and we can make decisions with as much of the full field in view as possible.